So if you've been training Jiu-Jitsu for any length of time, you've probably realized how complex and vast Jiu-Jitsu really is. You've probably realized there are a million different moves and techniques and positions out there. Really being able to decide which area you should focus on first or why you should focus on X, Y, and Z can often be very overwhelming and kind of complicated to make a decision around. It's kind of like if you had a 1,000-piece puzzle set and you just dumped all the pieces on the ground. Well, each piece is part of Jiu-Jitsu as a whole. So when you're looking at all those pieces, you're like, well, which one should I pick up first, or where should I go? Maybe you try to put a couple together and it's not working right away, and then you throw your hands up. In today's video, I want to talk about ways that we can kind of make Jiu-Jitsu a little bit less complicated in training, so that way you guys can start getting the success that you want. How's it going, guys? My name is Chasen Hill. I'm a Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I've been teaching and training now for over 14 years. So if you guys like all things Jiu-Jitsu, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. That way you never miss the latest video whenever it comes out. I want to appreciate all the new subscribers and support we've had recently. I greatly appreciate you guys, and I'll do my best to keep producing good content for you. So I know that this is a big problem because of my in-person students and the students that I coach online. A lot of times, my specialty of helping in students are ones that are lacking direction. So what do I mean by lacking direction? Well, they essentially have been training Jiu-Jitsu for a little bit length of time, and then they hit a wall. And they have tried to maybe buy an instructional, or they've tried doing a private lesson with a coach. They've tried training harder. They've tried asking their training partners, but nothing seems to be working and nothing seems to be clicking. Nothing seems to be making the impact that they're looking for on their Jiu-Jitsu. And that means that you're just kind of lacking direction. It means that you're not really sure what to do. You've tried all these different solutions. The way that I encourage them to start gaining the direction is first, understanding their different gaps and weaknesses that exist in their game. I like to encourage students to default to focusing on their gaps and weaknesses no matter what, especially when you're lacking direction, because it's called training for a reason. You're wanting to train to improve the stuff that you suck at. That's always how I have viewed training, and people who I really respect and learned up under Jiu-Jitsu, and always making yourself better by improving those things. Not that we can't improve strengths, but usually when you bias your training toward gaps and weaknesses, then you never have no direction. You always know that there are gaps and weaknesses out there to pick from. What I commonly see with students is that they have no way of really assessing their current gaps and weaknesses. They maybe intuitively know what they're lousy at or like what they're good at, but they're maybe not seeing the whole picture. So I really recommend that you do some type of kind of assessment or analysis first. The way that I recommend students do this is with something I call experimental rolling. And so experimental rolling just means that you're showing up and you're trying to look for these different gaps and weaknesses that exist in your game. Now, this often is going to require you to be a little bit maybe more passive whenever you're training. It means that you're not trying to impose your will or trying to ram your strengths down people's throats. Say, hey, maybe if I'm doing this guard position, I just want to see how long I can hold them off for, or if they can pass, like what are they passing with and how are they passing? And then if you don't know a solution to that problem, well, that's a pretty good insight that that's a gap or weakness that exists. A gap is often what I refer to as something that you lack real kind of knowledge or insight around, meaning that you've kind of heard of it, but you couldn't really articulate it, or you couldn't really demonstrate a whole lot of techniques from it. Guard retention, you've heard that word before, and you're kind of aware of what it is, but you're like, I don't know any moves from there. I probably couldn't really articulate it to somebody if I had to. A weakness means that you know the move, you know the steps, you know what you're supposed to be doing. You're just not good at it yet, essentially, right? So it's not up to even satisfactory level. These gaps and weaknesses are caused due to certain areas not even being up to satisfactory level yet. What's amazing is that if you start focusing on these different gaps and weaknesses and you only think about bringing them up to satisfactory level, it makes a tremendous impact on your jiu-jitsu. If a strength is like a 7, 8, 9 on a scale, well, trying to get it to go from like an 8 to a 10 is very hard. That last little bit of like strength refinement is some of the hardest things that you guys can do. And then the same thing also, trying to get something from like a 4, roughly, like something that's a weakness, like a 3 or a 4, to, you know, a 7 or an 8 takes a long time. But getting something from like a 0 to maybe a 5 actually is not as hard as it sounds. Even just trying to get something from like a 3 to a 5 is not that crazy. That is basically up to satisfactory level, if you want to call it that. It's very average, right? Satisfactory just means up to par and basic. And when you start thinking about it like that, that makes the overall crazy complex world of jiu-jitsu not so crazy and complex. Because if you can say, is my guard retention up to satisfactory level, yes or no, then if you say no, well, that's a pretty good insight. Maybe that's where you should spend your time training. You should be focused on taking these different gaps and weaknesses that exist and increasing them up to satisfactory level. And if you do that over and over and over again, and you keep kind of checking off the boxes of all these different gaps and weaknesses, I promise you will see your jiu-jitsu get night and day better. So let me know down in the comments below, which gaps and weaknesses do you guys think you have in your current jiu-jitsu abilities? I'm always fascinated and curious what students are struggling with. So let me know down in the comments below. Now, one of the hardest parts I think for students to do in this whole process is after they have kind of identified these certain gaps and weaknesses that they know they want to train, the paralysis by analysis, where essentially, if you're like a day 1 white belt, well, you're going to have a million things that are gaps and weaknesses. This is where I like to say you should be narrowing down or funneling down into 2 or 3 things at a time to focus on. I personally think it's very hard to really focus on more than 2 or 3 things at a time to give quality attention to. I'm a big fan of mapping out plans, especially over like a course of like a year and then breaking it down into monthly, because you could take this big year plan and say, okay, these are all the things I want to improve over a year. But when it comes to prioritizing, that means what is the most immediate problem that I need to solve right now. If you can become good at that, if you can start to take all these different gaps and weaknesses and narrow them down to the 2 or 3 that are going to make the biggest impact, that are really going to help improve your jiu-jitsu and come up to satisfactory level, then you've probably got a pretty winning success formula to get your jiu-jitsu progressing in the right direction. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to prioritize guard passing over takedowns, or why you want to prioritize sweeps over mount controls. Some of that is very personal. Some of that might be your own jiu-jitsu journey and it's very unique to you. Some of you, it might be for an actual competition that's coming up. So you need to prioritize this area of your game over this area. If you're training for self-defense, maybe you just, you know, don't want to get knocked out, or you just don't want to be able to be taken down for whatever reason. So there are all these different rhymes and reasons why you could choose to prioritize, but that is where jiu-jitsu is very unique to you. This is what happens when students try to model other competitors or other successful jiu-jitsu people too closely, is they kind of actually box themselves in. So in a weird way, actually prioritizing what's best for you is actually expanding the box a lot more, and it's a lot more effective than just trying to only carbon copy what this exact person is doing. Because you have to remember, that person did not start out that way. So if you had to think of like Gordon Ryan and back to when he was a blue belt, what he needed to work on and what he was good is not the same thing that you see him doing in competition now. So you can't just say, oh, that's what I want to do now, so I'm going to start working on that now. So there was a lot of other skills that he had to be developed, and a lot of other positions he had to develop to get to the point that he's at now. So everyone's going to kind of have a different metric or a different prioritization of what they should be focusing on, which is why jiu-jitsu is very unique. But to kind of summarize it and not make it as complicated as it needs to be or overwhelming as it needs to be is focus on the gaps that you have. Focus on the areas that you suck at. Focus on just making incremental success and improvement. Take that 3 to a 5, or that 1 or that 0 to like a 4 or a 5. And if you focus on just doing that over and over again, you blur out all the other noise and blur out if someone says you're not doing this, you suck, or this, you suck, and just focus on what's best for you. you will make a ton of success in jiu-jitsu. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys for checking out and tuning in. I can't wait to see what success you guys have. If you like this kind of information, make sure you guys schedule a free coaching call with me down below, where you can see if you're a good candidate for a program where I kind of help you prioritize what your jiu-jitsu needs. We'll kind of do these gap assessments. We'll do these skill assessments, kind of see where you're at and give you kind of some direction moving forward based upon those things. And so the consultation's totally free. It's just you chatting with me. Maybe you get some help. Maybe you join, maybe you don't. Anyway, with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.